Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Shishi Ki Jai. Gaur Premanandi. Jai Shri Gaur Nitai Mai Shishi Ki Jai. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Amrita, chapter entitled At Home in India. The Citroen and the Volkswagen were totaled, and the man and woman in the Volkswagen were both injured. Motorists soon stopped, and when the injured persons had received help, Prabhupada and the devotees got into a car and rode back to the temple. Harikesh was waiting anxiously, wondering why Srila Prabhupada was so late, when suddenly Prabhupada enters, walking very stiffly, saying nothing. When Harikesh saw all three were injured, he cried out, "My God, what happened? What happened?" But Srila Prabhupada just walked to his quarters and sat down silent. A devotee brought bandages for the obvious injuries. Prabhupada's chin, hand and leg, and Pushta Krishna's and Brahmananda's heads. Srila Prabhupada had said nothing since the accident. Finally he spoke. Asanapi klesha da asha deha. And he translated, "As soon as you accept this material body, there are so many difficulties. We were sitting peacefully in the car and the next moment crash." He talked briefly about the collision, and Brahmananda Swami told how just before the accident Prabhupada had braced himself with his cane, preventing perhaps more serious injuries. "Get some resin and turmeric," Prabhupada said. "Mix it together with a bit of lye and heat it." Prabhupada was again speaking. Bhagavad philosophy and practical medical remedies. It remained a frightening event, however, and Prabhupada asked the devotees to have kirtan. Krishna had saved them, he said. Considering that both cars had been destroyed, the injuries were negligible. Prabhupada sat like a battle hero, anointed in 3 places with a yellow poultice, while Harikesh read aloud from Chaitanya Charitamrita the disappearance of Haridas Thakur. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 5, Chapter 9, Text 4. It's Text 4. I'll just say the Sanskrit. Tasya piha va atmajasya vipraha putra snehanu. Number 4. You told me you did number 3.
Okay, well, the verse that I pointed to was the verse that I gave.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm doing the second.
And that's the Sanskrit I read, not this.
Okay, wrong. I asked you and you said you'd already done number 3, so number 4. I even mentioned it to you. I'll just do it. Tasya piha va atmajasya vipraha putra snehanubadamana asama vartanat samskaram yathopadesham vidadana upanitasya cha punaha suchamananadin karmaniyaman anabhipretan api samay shikshayat anushishtena hi bhavyam pitu putriniti. The Brahmana's father, Tasya of him, Abhihava, certainly, Atmajasya, of his son, Vipraha, Brahmana father of Jad Bharat, mad crazy Bharat,
the Brahmana father of Jad Bharat, mad crazy Bharat,
Putra Sneha Anupadamanaha, who was obliged by affection for his son, Asama Avartanat, until the end of the Brahmacharya ashram, Samskaran, purificatory processes, Yatha Upadesham,
Yata Upadesham,
as prescribed in the Shastras.
as prescribed in the Shastras.
Vidadhanaha,
Vidadhanaha,
performing.
performing.
Apanitasya,
Upinatasya,
of one who has a sacred thread.
one who has a sacred thread.
Ja,
Cha,
also.
also.
Punaha,
Punaha,
again.
again.
Shochad Achman Adin,
Socha Achamanadin,
practice of cleanliness, washing of the mouth, legs and hands, etc.
practice of cleanliness, washing of the mouth, legs, hands, etc.
Karma Niyaman,
Niyama,
the regulative principles of fruitive activities.
regular principles of fruitive activities.
Anabipretan Api,
Anabipretanaki,
although not wanted by Jad Bharat.
although not wanted by Jagannath.
Samishikshaya,
Sikshayat,
that taught.
taught.
Anushishtena,
Anushishtena,
taught to follow the regulative principles.
taught to follow regular principles.
He,
He,
indeed.
indeed,
Bhavyam,
Bhavyam,
should be.
should be.
Pituhu,
To,
from the father.
from the Father.
Putrena,
Trena,
the son.
the Son.
Iti,
Iti,
thus.
thus.
Translation. The Brahman's father's mind was always filled with affection for his son, Jad Bharat Maharaj. Therefore he was always attached to Jad Bharat. Therefore, because Jad Bharat was unfit to enter the Grihastha ashram, he simply executed the purificatory process up to the end of the Brahmacharya ashram. Although Jad Bharat was unwilling to accept his father's instructions, the Brahmana nonetheless instructed him in how to keep clean and how to wash, thinking that the son should be taught by the father. Please repeat. The Brahmana's father's mind was always filled with affection for his son.
The Brahman's father's mind was always filled with affection for his son.
Jad Bharat Maharaj.
Jad Bharat Maharaj.
Therefore he was always attached to Jad Bharat.
Therefore he was always attached to Jad Bharat.
Because Jad Bharat was unfit to enter the Grihastha ashram,
Because Jad Bharat was unfit to enter the Grihastha
he
ashram,
simply executed the purificatory process
he simply executed the purificatory process
up to the end of the Brahmacharya ashram.
up to the end of the Brahmacharya ashram.
Although Jad Bharat was unwilling to accept his father's instructions,
Although Jad Bharat was unwilling to accept his father's instructions,
the Brahmana nonetheless instructed him
the Brahman nonetheless instructed him
in how to keep clean and how to wash,
in how to keep clean and how to wash.
thinking that his son should be taught by the father.
This is essentially taught by the Father.
Prabhupada by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.
Jad.
Jad Bharat was Bharat Maharaj in the body of a Brahmana, and he outwardly conducted himself as if he were dull, deaf, dumb and blind. Actually, he was quite alert within. He knew perfectly well of the results of fruitive activity and the results of devotional service. In the body of a Brahmin, Maharaj Bharat was completely absorbed in devotional service within. Therefore, it was not at all necessary for him to execute the regulative principles of fruitive activity. As confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam, Swanudidasya Dharmasya Samsiddhi Haritoshnam, Bhagavatam 1-13. One has to satisfy Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the perfection of the regulative principles of fruitive activity. Besides that, it is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Dharma Swanustidapam Sam Vishvikshena Katashya Notpade Yatiratam Shrama Eva Hi Kevalam. Duties, dharma, executed by men, regardless of occupation, are only so much useless labour if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the Supreme Lord. Bhagavatam 1-8. These karma kanda activities are required as long as one has not developed Krishna consciousness. If one is developed in Krishna consciousness, there is no need to execute the prior regulative principles of karma kanda. Srila Madhavendra Puri said, O regulative principles of karma kanda, please excuse me. I cannot follow all these regulative principles, for I am fully engaged in devotional service. He expressed the desire to sit somewhere beneath a tree and continue chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Consequently, he did not execute all the regulative principles. Similarly, Haridas Thakur was born in a Mohammedan family. From the very beginning of his life, he was never trained in the karma kanda system. But because he was always chanting the holy name of the Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu accepted him as Namacharya, the authority in chanting the holy name. As Jad Bharat Maharaj was always engaged in devotional service within his mind. Since he had executed the regulative principles continuously in 3 lives, he was not interested in continuing to execute them, although his Brahmana father wanted him to do so. Om Jnanavarandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunvitanyana Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Brahmana's father's mind was always filled with affection for his son, Jad Bharat, Bharat Maharaj. Therefore he was always attached to Jad Bharat. Because Jad Bharat was unfit to enter the Grihastha ashram, he simply executed the purificatory process up to the end of the Brahmacharya ashram. Although Jad Bharat was unwilling to accept his father's instructions, the Brahmana nonetheless instructed him in how to keep clean and how to wash, thinking that the son should be taught by the father. So you see that Jad Bharat, so Bharat Maharaj from the body of the deer has entered the body of a Brahmin called Jad Bharat. And the reason he's called Jad Bharat is because Jad means somebody who's dull or not very, like, say, just dull-headed or not very clean. And so he acted like this, although he was very highly elevated in consciousness, he acted like a dull, deaf, dumb, and blind person. And it's very interesting. It's similar to Rishabhadev, although internally he was such an elevated soul. Externally he just acted like not a person that would fit in the social order. So this is because Jad Bharat was very fearful of the material energy, and he didn't want to interact with his relatives, his family members. He was afraid of becoming contaminated again and attached to the material energy again. So he was actually very afraid. So he tried in his way to avoid associating with them. So he pretended to be like dull and deaf and dumb and blind so that they wouldn't interact with him. And so this is actually because the greatest danger is to fall back down into the material world. So we can see that Bharat Maharaj in the body of the deer, he was actually very afraid of falling back down again. So in the body of Jad Bharat, he tried to make sure he didn't fall back down again. He'd already learnt his lesson. And so the greatest danger in the material world isn't actually death, it's actually falling back down into the material world, falling back down into the repeated birth and death. And because that's actually the cause of us undergoing repeated births and deaths for millions and millions of lifetimes. And Prabhupada said that the human life is obtained after many, many millions of births, and it is intended for purification. So that is the whole point. The human form of life is such a rare opportunity, and it's to be used in the best way possible. We shouldn't really waste it in the activities of the animals, like eating, mating, sleeping and defending. That's just, even the animals are doing that, so it's not really a great achievement for a human being to do these things. And the animals are actually doing it in a much easier way. They don't have to worry about economic problems, and they, like Prabhupada said, the Krishna's providing for the ant and he's providing for the elephant. The ant just needs a little bit of food, but the elephant needs like tons of fruit and veg in the jungles. And Krishna's providing even the elephant with all the necessities. So they're not struggling for economic development, to make money, to feed themselves. Everything's provided for them. So as in the human form of life, we've got the great opportunity to actually understand what is the purpose of life and how to get free from this repetition of birth and death. So it's actually intended for purification, like Srila Prabhupada said. So in the material world, there's danger at every step. So as we see here, Srila Prabhupada and Prabhupada Lilamrita, that they've had an accident, and everything was peaceful in the car, and then all of a sudden there's a crash. So there's danger at every step. And there's a verse in the Bhagavatam that describes this. In the 10th canto, it says, "For those who have accepted the boat of the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the shelter of the cosmic manifestation, and is famous as Murari, the enemy of Mura demon, the ocean of the material world is like the water contained in a calf's hoofprint. Their goal is Parampadam Vaikuntha, the place where there are no material miseries." not the place where there is danger at every step. And the last line of that verse is Padam Padam Yadvi Padam Natesham. So every step, Padam Padam is every step, and Yadvi Padam, where there are material miseries, Natesham, not for them. So the devotees do not want to stay in this material world where there's danger at every step. They want to go to the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, where there is no danger, where there is eternal life. And for a devotee, that is actually made so easy that it's like crossing the ocean of the material world is like the water containing a calf's hoof print. So a calf's hoof print is very small, so it's like walking over a calf's hoof print to get to the spiritual world. So by the process of devotional service, it's been made easy for us to actually attain that goal. So it's by devotional service that we can be delivered from this danger of being captured again by this ocean of material existence. So it's only devotional service that can save us from this precarious situation. And the danger can come in many ways, like material desires, temptations, with this, becoming attracted to sense objects, and various philosophies or misconceptions that can, misguide us. So we have to be careful we don't come under these things that can deviate us from our devotional service. And so Jad Bharat was extremely careful and not getting involved with material energy, he wasn't even doing basic hygiene. Although his father tried his best to instruct, he wasn't interested. And this may seem quite unusual, for a highly elevated advanced devotee, but Jad Bharat was like an avadut, he was like a Paramhamsa. He was so absorbed in devotional service that he wasn't even aware of all these external things. He wasn't interested in all the externals. But we shouldn't imitate this, thinking that this is the way we should be doing it. This was what was the hippie culture was about. Hippie culture was they were trying to become detached from material things and thinking this was very advanced. But because their consciousness wasn't on that same level, they weren't actually highly advanced like Jad Bharat, then it wasn't actually good for them. So when Srila Prabhupada came, he tried to, elevate their consciousness as well and help them to understand that, we can actually use everything in Krishna's service, like yukta vairagya, so renunciation, detachment from material things. Although they were trying to become detached from material things, they were very attached to intoxication and other these kind of things, so that wasn't actually real renunciation. So we can minimize what we use of the material world for ourselves, but we can use everything in Krishna's service and utilize it all. So we've got so many things that we can utilize in Krishna's service. There's cars, computers, mobile, all the modern technology, we can use it in Krishna's service, but we have to be careful we get embroiled in it and we become attached to it ourselves. So that's actually one of the problems is, although I was listening to a lecture by Kadam Kanna Maharaj, and he was saying that because what's his name? He says that Srila Prabhupada called the factories the the dungeons of the demons where Ugra karma is going on. And he says, Srila Prabhupada says it's horrible works meant to destroy the world as the Ugra karma. And all the products we use, like computers and phones, are the products of Ugra karma. So he said, even by using them in the service of the Lord, they are still from a demoniac source, so it will have some effect on us. So because that's a source, it's a Ugra karma, it's actually dangerous, so we can see that even when devotees drive cars, they can get really aggravated when people are on the road and make a wrong maneuver. So there's although we are all practicing non-violence and we are all vegetarian, we can still get really angry and upset by this road rage. So because it has an effect, this whole material energy has an effect on us. Similarly, like using mobile phones, it can be very addictive, because that's like this material energy is very, very mesmerizing, and it can completely, distract us so easily. Like the internet is the weapon of mass distraction, so it can easily distract us from so many things that we could be doing. We can easily get distracted by these things, so we have to be careful we don't become embroiled in it. And so in one sense, because we're using it in Krishna's service and helping the preaching movement, then it's actually Lord Chaitanya is protecting us. But we shouldn't think that this is, we can use it for our mundane enjoyment. And so we have to be careful. So we're actually relying upon the Lord's protection and intervention, that although we're surrounded by so much material energy, we really need His protection so we don't fall down again into material energy. And that's why, so we should actually have a good Krishna conscious environment where we can actually hear and chant and read Prabhupada's books, and as well as doing our preaching, so that we don't fall victim to these things. And that's why ashram life is very important. Whatever stage we're in, ashram life is very important, whether we're a brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, sannyasi. The ashram is like our shelter, it's like our protection. And so we have to, as much as possible, bring in spiritual things into our life and become detached from material things. It's like the grihastha ashrams, definitely one way where we can accumulate so much things that are unnecessary things, the things that we think we may need, personally speaking, I can see that I, as a brahmacharini, I had one room, and everything I had was in that one room. And as a grihastha, the house I've got is now bigger and bigger. The houses I've had have become bigger and bigger, and there's so much unnecessary things that I don't really need in the house. And even if I tried to get rid of them, it's always like, oh, I might need this one day, or it may be useful. And then so we keep stocking up all the things that we think that we're going to need. And then when we're looking for them, we can't find them. That's what ends up happening. We can't even find the things that we're looking for. So we end up accumulating so much junk. And actually the lockdown has been like it's been really good for me personally, because in that sense, because I've not been going out shopping, so I've not had to accumulate anything for the last year nearly. So it's been really good, because we don't really need all those things that we think we do, and it's just another attachment to try to get rid of. So it's easier to have less, and it's easier for our mind because it's less to be attached to. It's less, and it's also easier to give up then. It's not so much, so many things. So it actually clutters up our life, all these gadgets. And actually we don't really need them. We don't really need new gadgets. It's just we've been made to think that we do, because we have to, go with the times, and we need so many things. Because for 40 years I never had a phone, and in the last 10 years since I've had a phone, I've mainly been using it for service. Otherwise I probably wouldn't even use it much at all. And so it's we can see how we're made to feel that we really need all these things for ourselves. I mean, they're useful for doing certain things in preaching and service, but they're not really necessary for ourselves. Is there any comments or questions?
So part of the main verse, it says that he simply executed the purificatory process of
question. But I would understand that because the Grihastha ashram requires us to be more like, we have to perform so many rituals and so much, be very responsible. And because Jad Bharat wasn't even like doing the basic things like washing, and things, cleaning himself, then it would have been very difficult for him to be a responsible householder, to teach his children how to wash and clean, because he wasn't doing it himself. So that's actually being responsible, isn't it? If we are not responsible ourselves, we can't really train anybody else up to be responsible. So it really, because the Grihastha ashram is such a big responsibility to raise children and to, there's so many things that a Grihastha, according to the Karma Kanda system, they'd have to do so many rituals and so many samskars and to even have children and things, purificatory processes.
And it seems that in the purport, Sri Prabhupada was mentioning that he put the value of the holy name before these regulative activities. When he talks about regulative principles, he doesn't mean the four regulative principles as we know. He's talking about all the other karma kanda regulative principles. But it's interesting how Prabhupada puts devotional service and the chanting of the holy name above all these things. So that means many times when Prabhupada says that should be an indication to devotees not to become distracted by these rituals.
Yeah, that's the important point, because all these karma kanda, the way people have to do all these different rituals, this is it's not necessary for a devotee. Just like if one of your relative passes away, or your father, like my father passed away, I didn't have to perform all the rituals that they would have to perform, the pinda and this and that and the shrad. Prabhupada says that a devotee doesn't have to. If a devotee is given their life to Krishna consciousness, they don't have to perform all these things because they're already liberating their ancestors, their generations. So we don't have to perform all these karma kanda activities because we're already performing devotional service, which is like, we're going to get a far greater result than performing all these rituals. Shishi Godnidai Mai Shishiki Jai. And also like Srila Prabhupada's showing how Madhavendra Puri and Haridas Thakur, they, because they were so advanced in devotional service, they were great authorities in propagating the chanting of the holy names, and so they didn't have to, be embroiled with all these karma kanda activities. It's not really for devotees to get interested in all these rituals, because bhakti is actually more important than all these rituals. And even even like in deity worship and so many things that we do ourselves, it's actually the bhakti that's more important. And Prabhupada emphasised the bhakti process more than the ritualistic process. Don't know if that's... Prabhu, you had?
Yeah, I was reading the other day that there's being obsessed with circumstances rather than being interested in the essences. So it's like all the peripheral, superficial stuff distracts one from being the essentials.
Did you have? Yes, so we have to be like, we have to see the essence of what we're doing, what it's for. Like here, the whole point of the Varnashram is to please the Supreme Lord, and here it says like, duties executed by men regardless of occupation are only so much useless labour if they do not provoke attraction for the message of the Supreme Lord. So all these duties, dharmas, karma kanda activities that people are performing, they're only so much useless labour if they're not attracting us to devotional service and hearing and chanting. So that's actually the main thing, to perform devotional service, and all these other things are secondary. And also like in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is saying that the main thing is bhakti, performing devotional service, unalloyed devotional service, and all the other items of knowledge are secondary. So when in chapter 13 he gives all the things, all the knowledge, all the 20 items of knowledge. And Prabhupada says in the purport that the 2 items that are most important is performing unalloyed devotional service and accepting a spiritual master. And all the other things, although they're very good in themselves, they're not actually, unless they're connected to devotional service, they're not really of much use. Externally they may be of, to be austere and, all these qualities. They have to be connected to devotional service. So that's the main thing. And because devotees are engaged in the main activities of devotional service, then that's actually the performing the principal activities. So all the secondary qualities will naturally develop from that. They don't have to separately try to develop them. Because by attentive hearing and chanting, then the heart will get purified, and that will help us to develop all those qualities. Is there anything else? Yeah, so in one sense, we're not in, we shouldn't become, we have to have a healthy fear of the material energy and Maya, so that we don't, become entrapped by all these different allurements. But at the same time, by taking shelter of the process, then that's actually the best way we can protect ourselves. We can become purified by the process. And then all our material desires will diminish, so we won't have the same attraction for them. And so we won't get so affected by these things. But that's actually like part of the purification process, is that we can see for ourselves how our material desires have diminished, how we've become less attracted to the material energy and more attracted to Krishna. So this should be that kind of barometer of how we're advancing. And like Mahatma Prabhu was saying, we have to understand where we are, so we know how far we have to go. If we don't know where we are in devotional service, then it's going to be difficult to understand how to get to the goal. So, we have to kind of analyse that. Where am I in devotional service, and how can I go to the next step? Like if I'm in the beginning of devotional service, like sadhu sangha, then the next step is Jagannath Priya, take initiation from the spiritual master and follow the regulative principles, the vows, and how to chant, how to perform devotional service. So we have to understand that this is the next step. If we don't, then we're not going to take the next step. So that's why we need to know where we are, and why we're going through certain, maybe like through an artha nivriti, we're going through ups and downs, then that's an artha nivriti. So we're trying to get rid of the unwanted things in the heart. So there's going to be unsteadiness. So we can understand that this is why I'm going through this. And the next step is nishta. How do I become steady? So it helps us, it motivates us to go to the next stage of devotional service. And otherwise we won't be urgent, we won't take the necessary steps to proceed.
Jagannath, we read about him, he has a very attractive personality because he seems so free and untroubled.
Jagannath.
Yeah. And he's not, he doesn't get caught up in things, and nothing bothers him, regardless of how people treat him. It's very attractive. Yet, obviously we can't just imitate that, because that would be sahaja, it would be foolish, it wouldn't last. But it seems like he got to that platform because lasting freedom.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Thank you. We shouldn't try to, as I say, imitate Judd Barrett, thinking that this is a great lifestyle and we don't have to worry about what anyone says and does. We can ignore them. No, but actually, this isn't. You know, for Judd Barrett, he'd already gone through all the regulatory principles of devotional service and even reached the stage of Bhava. So he's already executing to a very high level of devotional service. So when he got the body of Judd Barrett, he was just taking off from where he had left off, which was Bhava. So it's not like he was gone back down to Shraddha and then he's got to work his way up, you know. He's already on a very elevated stage of devotional service, so he doesn't have to get him, you know. And also the reason why he was being like this was because he didn't want to associate with his family members in case he fell down again. He didn't want to become attached to all these things. So he was trying to avoid their association. So, but, you know, as devotees, we shouldn't be like revolting against our authorities in the same way, you know.
It's that we appear to be testament to the verse in Krishna says, the Suchinam Srimatam Devi verse, that if one doesn't complete in this lifetime, then he'll make the arrangement that we can continue from where we left off.
Yeah, and so, you know, some people may have already attained a high level of spiritual life in their past life and they're just continuing on in this life. But Srila Prabhupada set standards. That's why we follow them, because Srila Prabhupada set those standards for us. So he knew that, you know, the mentality, especially of the Western world, is going, you know, is take things cheaply, like the Sahaja mentality. So, and don't want to be like austere or, you know, so many things. But he could also see that because in the West nobody really knew anything about, you know, karma kanda activities and all these things, and it's easier for the devotees in the West to take it up. They didn't have this thing about demigod worship and so many rituals and things. They could easily take to the holy name. They could have full faith, pure faith. Srila Prabhupada gave them that pure faith. So it was easier for the Western devotees to take it up than the Indians, because the Indians were so caught up in like the rituals and the you know, the karma kanda activities and the demigod worship and so many other impersonalistic philosophies, that it was harder for them to take it up in that sense. But the Westerners didn't have all that baggage, so it was easier in one sense to take it up. Because I remember was one congregational couple, they were saying to me that it was very difficult for them to actually, because they were already worshipping Lord Shiva for so long, it was hard to kind of adjust to stop doing that and just take to Krishna consciousness, because they were so ingrained in that what will happen to them if they stop worshipping Lord Shiva, will they get punished or whatever, you know. So it was difficult for them to actually just take it up easily. Like, you know, we didn't have that problem because we didn't really have, you know, these kind of rituals that we followed for years. So, you know, we don't have to worry about not worshipping this demigod or that demigod, or not following this ritual or that ritual. It was easier. So in that sense, but Prabhupada could see that we needed discipline, we need a structure, a morning program, and the way Prabhupada structured the whole morning program so that we could actually have a real solid foundation. And I heard one devotee saying that in other, like the Gaudiya Mat, we don't have this kind of structure morning program, so it's like it's not so easy for them to kind of have a solid foundation.
So then, as someone said, well, I'll just do the easier one. They might decide, go to Gaudiya Mat, you have to do this, you don't have to do
Yeah.
And Prabhupada blesses us, you do this, you go back to Godhead, and then do the same.
Yeah, definitely. We can see that the reason Prabhupada gave us this was because he wanted to give us the most potent forms of devotional service first thing in the morning, so we have a good foundation. You know, we have this, you know, the 5 potent forms. Can anyone remember the 5 potent forms of devotion?
Srimad Bhagavatam, living the holy place, receiving the devotees, chanting the holy name, and worshipping the deity.
Yeah, so chanting the holy names, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, worshipping the deity, associating with devotees, and chanting, and living in a holy place, temple. So all these potent forms of devotional service, if we have them first thing in the morning, then it gives us a strong foundation for the rest of the day where we can perform devotional service and preach, whatever we have to do. But if we don't have that strong foundation, then we're not going to have a very strong, like if the root isn't very strong, then it's going to easily, you know, the plant will easily fall. And especially in the very early stages of a plant when it's growing, then because it's so weak, it needs a lot of support. So all these potent forms of devotional service are necessary to keep the sapling, you know, from falling over or getting destroyed. So it's like the hearing and the chanting is so important. So, but as the tree grows bigger, as the plant grows bigger, then it gets stronger and stronger. But it's only going to get stronger if it's continued to hear and chant. It's not that as we get on in devotional service we stop the hearing and chanting process, but we need to hear and chant continually because the plant continues to grow till it reaches the spiritual world. So this is the process of hearing and chanting has to be continued. The watering process has to be continued. It's not that now the tree's big enough that we don't water the tree or the plant. We still have to continue watering it.
Just ahead of the week, Srila Prabhupada was saying it's like pushing the car. When you first start, the car's going, and then when you push it, eventually the fuel starts to go through, and then the car actually just goes off on its own. He was saying, providing the regulations are there to push us, but it should eventually get to the point where the car just, we actually just are able to go, and then we get the energy to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but still, as I was saying, it's not that we stop the chanting healing process, we still have to continue that. Yes.
I was actually when the GBC strategic planning team were interviewing GBC members about the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And then when Prahlad Raj was interviewed, like Prahlad Raj has memorized the whole Bhagavad Gita, and he did that when he was like young, just because he had that ability, and he's memorized the whole of Krishna book as well. Anyway, he definitely knows the Bhagavad Gita off by heart, and has read Srila Prabhupada books many, many times. But he says that he would never be able to perform his duties as a GBC unless he read Srila Prabhupada's books for 2 hours every day. So even though he's got so much important service, and he's like the sannyas minister, and he's the health minister, and he's got lots of disciples, but still every day he says he needs that strength of like associating with Srila Prabhupada through Srila Prabhupada's books.
Yeah, that's a very important point because he's a sannyasi and he's GBC, and you can say, well, he's already read Prabhupada's book so many times, why does he need to continue reading them, things like this. But this is actually the reason he is in that position is because he's reading Srila Prabhupada's books, and because he's continuing to read them, he's continuing to stay in that service. So that's what's actually giving him the fuel to be able to do that service. So it's so vital that we keep associating with Srila Prabhupada through his books and his instructions, and that's actually going to keep us in performing devotional service.
So in the purport it was also mentioned that Lord Chaitanya gave Aristotelic the position of Namacharya, although he wasn't brought up with different rules and regulations of the Brahmin family, etc. And there were many devotees of Lord Chaitanya who were, so you think, why didn't he select one of those? What was his message there?
Yeah, he wanted to show that devotional service is not dependent on material qualifications. And he wanted to break this caste system, because at that time people were so rigid in the caste system that, you know, if you were, even if a Muslim sprinkled water on you, you'd lose your caste as a Brahmana, you know. So he wanted to show that you know, chanting the holy names is actually supersedes all that. It's not dependent on material qualification of the caste we're in or anything. So he chose Haridas Thakur, who was born in a Mohammedan family, to show them this. Okay, I better stop there. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Iskon Gurvinda ki jai, Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Premanandi.
Hari Om.
Jai.
Jai.
Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki